In this segment of On the Ground, I'm talking to Ali Nadeem in California. He lives in Oakland, which is the San Francisco Bay Area of Northern California. So he's very close to Silicon Valley. So I wanted to get his perspective on what's happening in the U.S., what's happening in California, which is is the most populous state, close to 40 million people in the U.S. Almost has 2 million more people than the entire population of Canada. Has one of the biggest GDPs in the world. California in itself, I think, is the fifth highest economy in the world, the fifth biggest economy in the world. So the effects of the pandemic are pretty intense in California. So I wanted to get his perspective. He works in the finance sector. He's lived in Canada as well, and lived on both the East Coast and now lives on the West Coast of California. So he can bring some unique insights into the conversation. So Ali and I will have a good conversation about what's happening during the pandemic, what's happening in politics in the U.S. And I hope to do a cross-section of the U.S. Talk to someone in a southern province, in a southern state, talk to someone on the West Coast, maybe interior as well, and kind of get a broad understanding of how the pandemic is being handled in the U.S., how citizens are coping, and what states are doing well and faring well versus other areas of the country. Okay, so yeah, have a listen. Thanks so much. I'm very excited to have Ali Nadeem on the show today. Ali reached out to me on LinkedIn after watching one of my videos or something. I can't remember. Why did you reach out, Ali?
So you know what? it was interesting because I was looking at, I have not been I have not been able I haven't been following attention to Canadian politics lately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think this one day I was just sitting around, and it was probably later on in the evening. My wife was sleeping, and I was just kind of Googling Canadian politics, and you came up. You were part of a talk or a seminar, or you were having a conversation, and then I just Googled you. I'm like, well, this is interesting. Alberta, you talk about Canadian politics and international political conversation. You were part of not just the Canadian political conversation. You were also engaging in a broader political international conversation. So I'm like, wow, he seems interesting. So I looked you up, and I messaged you on LinkedIn, and you were kind enough to get back to me, and I appreciate that.
Well, it was interesting because when you reached out, I was just thinking about launching this On the Ground series and talking to people in different parts of the world. So it was perfect. It was fortuitous that someone from California reached out, because that's one of the places in the U.S. I want to do a series in the U.S.
Right.
And California was definitely on my list of places that I wanted to talk to people. I like to hit the southern U.S. and then the eastern, but this will be the first one getting an American perspective. But you're not American by birth. You've lived all over. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Pakistani by birth. I was born in Pakistan. I was born in Karachi, and then my dad was a naval officer. So we moved the typical military rotation every 2 years. So I mostly live in Karachi. We spent a little bit of time in Turkey and Libya when I was very young. And then it's mostly been back to back, different naval stations in Karachi, and then Islamabad, and then Rawalpindi. And then for college, I came to Canada. So I'm a naturalized Canadian citizen. I left Pakistan around 99, 2000. I went to University of Windsor, and then I transferred to York University. I finished in New York, and I worked for about a year. And I came back to Pakistan. And then I returned to Toronto in 2008. That was my first financial crisis that I experienced as a young adult. And so lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Went to Dalhousie for a master's in economics, worked with the Canadian Public Service in Economic Development and Sector Strategy. Then moved back to Toronto, worked for a think tank, a nonprofit, and one of the Ontario ministries. And then I moved to Boston to do another graduate degree. I went to the Kennedy School at Harvard, and then I got a job. I around, this is 2016 now, and then I got married in 2018, and I moved to California in 2019. So I guess I've touched the points from Toronto to Eastern Canada,
Yeah.
Boston to California. And then I also went back to Pakistan in November after many years to see my parents. And it was very interesting because, you know, this is the country that I was born in. And I guess I was relearning my own country, like things that I've forgotten. So that was also a very interesting experience, sort of looking at my country of birth from an outsider's perspective, which is weird because I was, you know, I was there for pretty much all the way through to high school. So yeah, it's like, it seems like wherever I go now, I'm looking from the outside. I'm looking in from the outside. So it's a very different perspective. In America, I'm looking at America as a Canadian. In California, so I have a lot of different perspectives in my head. You know, the last couple of years has been like that for me. I guess, you know, one good way is I guess I'm maturing, and that's part of being a mature adult, or more of a grown up than, you know, than when I was 25.
Well, you know, that's the life of an expat, right? You're always kind of the outsider looking in. You know, I've had
Yes.
a similar experience. I was born in Pakistan, but I left when I was very young with my
Right.
parents and my family, and grew up in Canada. But I had a chance to go back to Pakistan in
Right.
2011 to 2013. I lived and worked there. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I felt the same way, you know, like an outsider looking in, but also very curious and interested
Mm-hmm.
in my own people and my own customs and things that I've kind of seen, you know,
Right.
a version of it in Canada when
Right.
interacting with the Pakistani community, but to see it on that scale was very informative and eye-opening and life-changing, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting, and also, you know, it's also a different perspective. My parents are retired, so their life is slow, uh, and I think some of the people that I interacted with, you know, they're also that age bracket, and things for them are also a little bit slower. So when I went back, even though it was a vacation, but subconsciously I was still used to doing things, you know, at the same pace as I would do them in the US, in California. Just, you know, the day to day, you're trying to get on the transit system to go to work. And, you know, I live in Oakland, which is the next city over from from San Francisco. And then the day to day, sort of forcing myself to slow down and kind of be at the same pace as my parents. So that was also a bit of an adjustment. And yeah, yeah, a lot of interesting things that I experienced.
So you were there in November of 2019?
Yeah, just a few months ago.
Okay. What is you know, while we're talking about Pakistan, what's the overall, I mean, that was pre-pandemic, but what was the overall political
Yeah.
state now that, you know, Imran
So
Khan is prime minister since 2018?
yeah, so it's interesting. I don't really follow the Pakistani politics, but when I was there, the one major event that happened. So there are two things. You know, Imran Khan um, obviously became the prime minister of the country, and a lot of the younger demographic tends to support him. And you know, he also had a lot of support in people in their 40s and 50s, so different generations across. I think he was able to get enough support across different generations in the country. People were very hopeful with his politics, with his, you know, they liked his ideas, and they were really hoping that he would do something different. And so I think a lot of people were very disappointed. Uh, some people were also very angry. And so, yeah, I think and even now I talk to my parents, you know, I talk to my dad, and there's a sense of disappointment with his politics. And I think it's even more so because when he became the prime minister, there was just so much hope. And I think, you know, so it's the idea, you know, you have all these ideas, you have all these perspectives, and you know, you've created this wonderful rosy picture of this country, and you try to turn it into this social democracy like the Scandinavian countries, and then nothing happens, and people think he's weak. People think he's not able to take a stand. People think he's not it's a different kind of country. You have to be a tough leader to run the politics of that country. So I think a lot of people think that he showed a lot of weakness consistently. He's just not able to take decisions, and his indecisiveness is, I think that's what making people very unhappy with his politics. And
Well, I mean, I
so
think
yes,
a few things are in play there, right? I mean, first of all, actually, I did an interview with someone on the ground in Pakistan, which I haven't published yet, during the pandemic and to see what's happening. And, he had some insights. Him and I actually worked
right,
with PTI when I was there
right.
for the 2013 election, where PTI won just one state, but it
Hmm.
made a lot of momentum forward, which was the momentum they built on to win in 2018. So
Right.
there's a few things at play. I mean, first of all, people have to understand that this is only the third time in Pakistan's history that a democratically elected government has passed power to a democratically elected government. Before that, it was always military coup, democratic government, military coup, democratic government, and that's been the history of Pakistan, which creates
Yeah.
all kinds of upheaval and all kinds of complications. So I think, in fairness to Imran Khan, 2 years isn't a lot of time to undo all of the complexity and problems that have
Yeah.
been caused by
I agree with
a
you.
history of military and democratically elected governments. Never mind the fact that, I mean, it's still very divisive and partisan in Pakistan. I mean, for example, Sindh, the state that Karachi is in, is still controlled by the People's Party of Pakistan, right? So, and they're working hard to undermine him, which is very different than in federal politics in North America, right? Even though we may have provincial leaders or state leaders that aren't in line with the national party that's in power, they don't have the power they do in Pakistan to really undermine the leader when there's only 5 provinces, right? The five
Yeah, and
provinces or four in Pakistan?
I think it's five.
It's
I
five,
think
yeah.
it's also the comparison of Pakistan versus North America. I don't think that's a legitimate comparison. It's a different country, different history, different politics. And I agree with you. 2 years is not a lot of time. I think in an ideal world, someone like Imran Khan could hopefully stay for the next 10, 15 years. It's going to take a long time to work on the civilian institutions and the democratic institutions you need to do the kind of things that he hopes to do. It's not gonna be done in a year. It's not gonna be done in 2 years. This is a long-term process. Institution building and democracy. This is not done overnight. It takes decades. It takes decades with a lot of good people. It takes decades with a lot of dedicated people. I mean, my experience with the Canadian public service, it was very interesting. I was talking to one of my bosses. These are just official conversation that you have when you're working on some projects. And he said, "What we did, this was done 100 years ago. What is Canada is what 1867, if I'm correct. I think the birth of Canada.
Yep.
And we
Yeah,
worked on institutions.
been just over 150 years, yeah.
Yeah, so we really worked hard on our institutions, and that's why we have a good judicial system, good civil service, good public institutions, and it took a very long time. So I think spinning that on Pakistan, like something could be done in over 2 years. I don't even know. That's not a realistic expectations. You need to give good people who are actually dedicated. It takes decades. So,
Well, not just that. I
uh,
mean, you have to remember, in the entire history of Pakistan, the 70
right,
years since partition, it's been a
right,
constant state of upheaval, right? You're fighting two border wars with Afghanistan and India. There's a border war going on in Afghanistan. There's a border war going on with India over
yeah,
Kashmir, right? There's
yeah,
the geopolitical interference in Pakistan is unlike almost any other country in terms of its positioning with border with China and India and its positioning in relation to Iran and the Middle East, right? So those
yeah,
kinds of things play a huge part in what a state leader is able to accomplish, right? Because he's not just fighting the internal battles, but he's also fighting international battles and
yeah.
international
It was
agreements.
it was actually interesting. I was telling my wife that the other day. I was telling her that um, I think I'm not too sure, but I was telling her that, Americans don't understand, or a lot of the people in the Western world don't know that Pakistan has suffered the most as a result of the war on terror. I think we've had a lot of our military personnel have died. We've had a lot of civilian casualties. If you tally it all, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of people all across the country in the last 20 years. And I think I was reading an article a while back where it talked about we've had more casualties, more casualties than the combined casualties of Iraq and Afghanistan, including all the American troops that have died in these two wars. You've had more casualties than that in Pakistan, just in that one country.
Well, I'd be surprised
All
with that.
these,
I'll have to look at that up. I mean,
yeah,
that seems impossible to me that there would be more casualties in Pakistan than
you've had, I
Iraq or
think,
Syria.
this is not, I'm
Are you
not
talking about
counting
just
civilian.
military? Are you talking about military casualties or civilian casualties?
So let's just say the number of American soldiers that have died in Afghanistan and Iraq, our total casualties have been more than that. That
Oh,
number of
American soldiers.
American
Okay. So
soldiers.
you're comparing
No,
Pakistani military to American military. That's what you're comparing.
No, this is including all the Pakistani military personnel that we've lost and the civilians we've lost. Add the two together, that total is more so than the total American casualties in these two countries.
Yeah,
So
that's more.
I think
that's more
yeah.
believable.
Yeah. So no, this does not include the civilian casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's a different number altogether. But I agree with you. I think strategically Pakistan is in a position where it has a lot of interference from all different big powers and other regional powers. So I think, and then on top of that, you have to run a country. And the top, so it's always been an upheaval. So yeah, 2 years is not a lot of time.
Yeah. So and also too, I mean, I would ask the question of Pakistanis is, would you rather have a leader who's measuring and taking things into account and thoughtfully putting forth change, or someone who's just going to be reactionary and maybe do more damage than good? I hope, from what I know of Imran Khan, having read a couple of his books and keeping a close eye on his politics, I think that he would be someone who's taking a measured approach, and he's taking his time and thinking through things, and also taking into consideration what the future effects of his decisions might be. And if that's the case, then I think Pakistanis should give him a little bit more time and a little bit more leeway. You're not going to undo decades worth of corruption and upheaval in 2 years.
No, I agree with that 100%. Definitely, I think it's a matter of patience, You have to have patience with these kind of things. This is not an overnight. This is not you wave your magic stick and everything is going to change for the better. That's not going to happen. It doesn't happen in any country. It doesn't happen in countries that are relatively quieter and more peaceful. And a country like Pakistan, you just need a lot more time.
Oh, look at how hard it is to change things in Canada and the U.S. How hard it is for us to have electoral reform. How hard it is to change the way that our governing parties are elected. How difficult it is to make even the smallest change in the electoral process. So going and judging a country of 200 million people with the density that Pakistan has and the other issues that it has in terms of literacy and poverty, it's an almost unbearable task.
Again, Pakistan, it was it's a country that was colonized, different history, and I always tell people it's even comparing America to Canada sometimes not a legitimate comparison. I think Pakistan it's just, and you nailed it, like literacy and poverty and all that, lack of strong civilian or democratic or judicial institutions. So there's a lot that's good about it, and then there's a lot that's not. And in rich countries like the United States or Canada, even here it's a challenge to create certain policies or to amend certain policies. But in a country like Pakistan, if it's a challenge here, then that's a bigger battle in those countries.
Absolutely. So let's move to Canada and the U.S. now. So what's happening there on the ground you're in Northern California, you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, in Oakland.
Yeah.
So what's the situation there on the ground? How are people coping with the pandemic? What has been the approach to the lockdown and restrictions?
So it's been interesting. Gavin Newsom, he's the governor of California. He was very proactive in terms of um, implementing the lockdown. I believe Oakland is part of the Alameda County, and San Francisco is part of the San Francisco County. So the Bay Area, you have Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco, and other parts, other cities that I'm not, I can't think of them right now. Not coming off the top of my head. These were the first cities to actually implement the lockdown. So we have been in a lockdown all of March and all of April. So I guess pretty much we've been in lockdown for 2 months now. Gavin Newsom called it. I think he was the first governor of a major state to start actively encouraging people, practice social distancing. You don't have to go to work. And then there was an actual official lockdown, which started very early in March. For the first couple weeks, I think not a lot of people left home. I mean, these areas are very dense. You are around the public transportation system. We call it the BART. In Toronto, it's called TDC, Toronto Transit. They're very, these cities are very dense. San Francisco is very dense. Parts of Oakland are very dense. It's been quiet. I think the first couple of times, for the first few weeks, I didn't really go out. But then when I did, you could see people were walking around. They were practicing social distancing. Now when I go out, everybody's walking around with masks. So it's like you're living on a movie set. People are now actively practicing social distancing. A few things that I've noticed, some restaurants have reopened, but they are, it's mostly takeout food. So I think in terms of our infection rate, I think we are a lot better than other parts of the country. Northern California is better than Southern California. I think LA County took a little bit longer to implement the lockdown. So Northern California is a little bit better. We have less infections per 1,000 people, and we have definitely less death cases in California. I know New York for a while, New York was not doing well. I think things are a little bit stable in New York now. But yeah, it's been really hard for small businesses, and I think they are really facing the brunt of all this. And yeah, this is a very unanticipated situation. No one really saw this coming. People have been talking about recession, but this is just, this is a totally different life experience for a lot of people.
So let's give it some context here. So state of California, the most populous state in the US, 39.5 million people. It's almost, 2 million more people than all of Canada are living in the state of California. California has a GDP more than some countries in the world.
It's the fifth largest economy in the world right now.
Yeah, fifth largest
It's
economy.
always either fifth or sixth always, but for now it's the fifth largest economy.
So in comparison to New York State, so New York State's only 20 million people, so considerably less. But I mean, you're right. California has 65,000 cases, 2,600 deaths, and New York is 338,000 cases and 26,000 deaths, 10 times the deaths of California. So there's a definite issue in terms of containing this in New York, but in California as well, the cases are rising like day by day. Even though you guys did a early and strict lockdown, the transmission continues to grow, and the death rate continues to grow. Now, 50% of the cases are in LA County, and that's a very populous area as well. And 49% of the deaths are in nursing homes. So there's definitely an issue there. And that might be just because, I think California probably has quite a bit of an older population as well. So those numbers are quite high. So what's going on in terms of the inability to flatten the curve?
It's hard to say. It seems like on the outside, when I read the news, it seems like the state has been more active. The problem is testing, and I think they're just not able to do as many tests as they thought they would. They were hoping to start testing about a month ago, testing on a regular basis, testing a certain number of people every day. That hasn't happened. That's the first thing. So I think as they are testing more people, it's it's turning out that more, that you have more people per 1,000 people infected. So nursing homes has been a problem. I think I was talking to someone in Toronto just yesterday, and she was telling me that a lot of cases in Toronto have been in nursing homes. And so it's interesting. Nursing homes, there were a couple of articles that were floating around a couple of weeks ago that nursing homes are basically that those places are hotbeds for infections, because people live in close proximity and they're older, they're more vulnerable. Some of them already have pre-existing conditions, and I think that the whole infectious process. But on average, I think when I just look at the law of averages, I think California is doing a little bit better than most states. Parts of California are very dense. It's almost impossible not to run into people. Because you go out the street, there are like 100 people, 50 people just walking around in different directions. And that is, when you start practicing social distancing, then you don't see as many people, interact with less people. But in nursing homes, I don't know. I think what I can think of is the lack of the absolute essentials that you need to kind of control it. Testing and ventilators, right? The entire country is short on testing kits and ventilators.
And PPE, right? Personal protection equipment is in short supply.
Yeah.
And I know that's an issue in California as well. But nursing
Even
homes, I mean,
though
also remember with nursing homes early on, it's transmitted
Yeah.
by visitors as well, right? Nursing homes have
Yeah.
a lot of visitors.
So there was an article, I think Gavin Newsom was able to secure some kind of a contract with companies, not just American companies, Chinese companies, that were supposed to start providing us with everything that we need to keep it under wraps, keep it under control, not keep it under wraps, keep it under control. When I say all the things, all the testing kits, all the ventilators, I don't know what happened to it. I know the federal government, the FDA, they had started their own testing kits. The CDC had its own programs. A lot of these programs didn't really materialize. Something happened, a few things fell through. So overall, what we were hoping that we'd have more testing, it just hasn't happened. But a lot of the hospitals in California are still talking about it, that at some point in time, which is very soon, they'll start testing a lot more people.
But that's also worrisome, right? Because that means that there's probably more cases out there than even what's being reported now.
I think that's what it is. When you start testing, you'll know that more and more people are infected.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll drive up infection rates. But it's
so
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So you guys have been locked down for 2 months. So what's the plan then? I mean, is there talk about lifting restrictions, or is it just nope, because our cases are growing, because we're not able to test, because we don't know what the true numbers are? There's no light at the end of the tunnel in terms of lifting restrictions.
Right. So I think some states have opened already, or Maryland opened yesterday, I think. California, no, this shelter in place has been extended all the way till the end of May. There are talks that this could potentially go till June. And to be honest, I mean, the way I look at it, I mean, I would not be surprised if this lockdown is in place till July. It was supposed to have been lifted by the 3rd. It has not been. And all of May. So basically, we've been in a lockdown. By the time May ends, we will have been in a lockdown for 3 months. And this could go on till July.
So what is the overall feeling and effects of this? I mean, again, like you said, California has one of the biggest economies in the world, 5th biggest in terms of GDP. You're also the home of Silicon Valley, the home of innovation and tech. So A, how's this affecting Silicon Valley? How has Silicon Valley reacted? And B, what is the economic forecast and attitudes towards that?
So the economics, I can tell you about it, because I think I work in finance, public finance. So the state came up with a revised budget. So the state, the 5th largest economy of the world, which has been in a surplus, they've been making a lot of money, and then they've been saving a lot of their money. So they have about a little over $48 billion just saved up. It's a rainy day fund for California. The way the fiscal year works in California, it's from July 1st to June 30th. So June 30th, we still have all of June and whatever's left of May. So the state is now projecting a deficit for all of fiscal 20, about $10 billion, a little over $10 billion. And then for 21, fiscal 21, July 1st, 2022, June 30th, 2021, they're projecting a deficit of $40 billion, over 40. So all in all, they're projecting a deficit of over $50 billion. So economically, I think the state is going to take a big hit. Now, in terms of layoffs, I mean, it started with the hospitality sector in California. Airports are shut down, toll roads, traffic is low. Small businesses have taken a massive hit. Coming down to other sectors. So interestingly, transitioning the workforce from going to an office to working from home has been easier in California, because I think there's been a culture, especially in the Bay, of working from home. So it's been a little bit easier than some other states, and this is just, you know, personal conversation that I've had with people in New York and Boston. I think their startups have laid off around 20,000 people. This is just, I think, startups all across the country, but there are enough startups in the Bay that have laid off a lot of people. So economically, the state is going to take a hit. I think some industries were affected right away, hospitality. And then others, it's a trickle down effect, right? It's going to take, it's coming in slowly. Overall, there are about over 30 million unemployment claims to date. There are all kinds of estimations. 15% of the workforce is unemployed. Some say it's about 20, depending on, you know.
Those are federal numbers, right? You're not.
Yeah, these are federal numbers. But California, I mean, California is going to take a hit. Just coming back to California, it's just, I don't know. I think there are all kinds of federal aid packages. There are state funds now. I think the state will be fine because they've been smart to save the money that they made since the last recession.
No, $48 billion is nothing though, Ali. You know, like Canada itself, you know, for 40 million people, Canada itself, we're already $200 billion in the hole, right?
Yeah,
I think provide the supports, the financial supports for 40 million people. You're going to go through $40 billion in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, I mean, so they'll definitely need help from the feds. That's what I think. But I think this is what they have now, and you know, these projections could change. They may come up with a revised budget in a couple months and say, you know what, we'll be in a bigger hole. So it's, but I think in terms of when they reopen the economy, when they do, there's a lot of speculation that there's another strain that's going to come and hit us in September, October. Things might get better, but then it's going to get worse. So it's to be honest, I don't know if there's a plan. The plan is to stay in, work from home, and then, you know, all the schools are closed, all the kids are home. The new norm is working from home. You know, we have meetings, and a lot of time you hear kids in the background. You know, parents are teaching their kids, they're homeschooling their kids, and they're working. So a lot of things are changed. So I don't know how long this can go on. And yeah, I actually don't know. I don't know anyone has an answer to that.
So in California, because a lot of countries already and even provinces in Canada have started to roll out phased reopening plans, right? So, you know, they're phased, and the idea is that, you know, you try reopening one or two areas. You know, for example, in Alberta, we're going to allow restaurants to reopen with the limited capacities starting next week. And then you track your numbers and you see if, you know, what the effect is. If more cases, if there's another spike, then you clamp down again. If things are going well and there isn't any spikes, then you continue to open up. So I think this phased approach is what's common throughout the world. Everybody's taking a little bit of a different twist on it. But it seems like the U.S. is not at all prepared. I haven't heard of anywhere in the U.S. where there's any talk of, I mean, obviously there's demands for reopening, but any talks of actually formally reopening the economies.
Yeah, so I think states tend to be more, that's the interesting thing about the U.S. Every state is like in its own country. I mean, California, you can argue that California is its own country. I mean, Gavin Newsom, the governor, he actually used the word nation state for California. You don't use nation state for a state within a big country. He said the nation state of California, which is like, whoa, this is, I guess that would, that has to do with the politics here too. Democrats versus the Republicans. But that being said, there have been conversations about phased or incremental opening of businesses or the economy. I think today there was an article that if in a city or a county or a region you have a certain number of cases, let's say you have 5 out of 1,000 cases, I'm just throwing a number out, if you've had less than a certain threshold, you can start opening your businesses. But you also have to figure out a way to test people, and if something were to happen, you'd have to start closing things again. So there are conversations around that. I don't think there's a big federal piece here. I don't think there's the American media talks more about the tussle between the governors and the federal government versus conversation about what they're thinking or planning to do. But I think, yeah, I don't know. When I just look at it, the bigger picture is Canada was, because of the political system and because of the way the country is run, things seem, on average, overall, a little bit better all across the country in Canada versus the US. Again, they're two different countries. It's probably not a good comparison. You could argue that, but I think, yeah, so there have been conversations, but I don't know if that's going to I don't know if, especially in terms of California, what do we expect to see in California? Everything is still up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, we are two different countries, Canada and the U.S. I mean, population alone, you have 10 times the population in the U.S. And our politics are very different. But the issue is because we share a border and we share media concerns, and many corporations from the U.S. are operating in Canada, the politics seep in here all the time, and it's becoming more so that the politics of the U.S. are seeping into the national conscience in Canada, and also affecting the way that we behave and how our political parties behave. So leaving that aside, I mean, the overall opinion of how the U.S. is handling the pandemic is not very good, not very positive in the rest of the world. So how is it internally? How do the citizens of Northern California and in the area you are, do they feel that, by and large, that the state is handling things well, the governor is doing the best that he can, but the issue is that federally it's not being handled well?
I think people do think that the governor has handled it better than the federal government or the president. People generally feel that the federal government or the Republican Party or the president of the United States has not been consistent with the messaging. He's been flip-flopping. Federally, there has not been a strong message or indication or help. Statewide, I think California, a lot of Californians think that Gavin Newsom has shown leadership. He has taken a stand, and he's doing what he can. He could, there's always an argument that he could do better. But I think there's somewhat of a consensus that he's doing a better job than the president in terms of messaging and in terms of attempting to contain it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, California stands out in the sense of that, it's always been a more progressive state.
Right.
I've spent quite a bit of time in both Northern California and Southern California as well. And I mean, definitely, the overall political bent, I would say, is a lot more progressive and
Mm-hmm.
liberal leaning than other parts of the country. And so in that sense, the governor might be right in the fact that you almost have to look at California as an independent state, and also to, again, the strong economy, the presence of Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley, what's going on is you have all these multi-billion-dollar unicorns and other organizations that are operating out of Silicon Valley. Where are they in terms of developing PPE, personal protection equipment? Where are they in terms of providing funds to help other companies? Are these large, multi-billion-dollar corporations actually part of the solution? Are they stepping up? Or are they just kind of, just trying to tread water themselves? What's happening
Yeah,
with Silicon Valley?
the Silicon Valley unicorns. I don't know. It's hard to actually give a direct answer to that. I think they're functional. They're doing okay. They're doing what they are as corporate entities. They're functioning. They're functioning as I guess they're functioning as you would expect a big corporate entity to function.
Are
A
they
lot of the
taking care
employees.
of their workers, or are there mass
Yeah.
layoffs, or what's happening?
So I think the big tech, I have not heard mass layoffs. It's the smaller tech companies, it's the smaller startups, mid-level startups, or mid-tier startups. The big tech, I think the big tech is strong, it's solid. Um, they've told their employees, Google, I think, has told its employees that, it's likely that you'll just work from home throughout the year. So a lot of the employees are working from home. That's the new norm. And in terms of the supply chain, now I'm not too sure about how big tech is involved in helping out the state, but there are some, the state of California talked about some kind of supply chain manufacturing that they've been able to figure out to help them with the mask and the ventilators and all the protection equipment that you need to contain this in California. But I have not heard of or have not seen major big tech participation in this whole pandemic.
Yeah, and there's the issue, right? So here you have, what's lauded as the most innovative area in the
Mm-hmm.
world, right? Ali, we've got breweries, small breweries in Canada that have, retooled and are making hand sanitizer, right? Have retooled and are making face masks, not
Mm-hmm.
breweries, but other manufacturers that are retooled and making face masks. So I find it interesting that, this hotbed of innovation and tech that exists in Silicon Valley, and they haven't been able to respond and deal with the shortage of ventilators and deal with the shortage of
Yeah,
PPE.
yeah, I get it. Not because it doesn't mean that if I don't know it, it's not happening. But I've not heard anything personally. I've not seen anything. I've not heard anything. Um, but you are right. This is the hotbed of innovation, and the conversation is, it's hard to retool your manufacturing plant from, let's say, product A to making a ventilator. Ventilators are very complex instruments. They're not easy to retool. I mean, it's hard to retool your infrastructure to, build a specific kind of ventilator for this. So that's what I've heard. Um, but I would hope that, this hotbed of innovation, something will come out of it. But, so far,
Well, I mean, that's
I,
where, I think some of the shine is coming off of, tech in Silicon Valley, because in times like these, if you can't react, I mean, your whole positioning for Silicon Valley is their ability to react with tech, right? And ability to solve the world's problem. Well, if you're not doing anything to solve the world's problems now, then, that's all false, because, at the end of the day, what the world needs right now isn't e-commerce sites, right? So I don't care how many e-commerce sites you can build. What I'm worrying about is,
no,
where does that tech intelligence, that tech think tank, where is that now when the country and the world needs true innovation and true reaction? I mean, there's poor, impoverished countries in the world that are building ventilators out of car parts, Ali. So you're
yeah,
telling me
no, I agree.
Tesla?
Yeah.
You're telling me Tesla can't figure out how to pump out some ventilators?
Oh, well, Tesla did something. There was something in the news a little while ago. Elon Musk came out and said, I've built and I have all these ventilators. I've given it to the state. It turns out that they weren't functional, they weren't working. And also, there were a lot of ventilators sent to the state of California by the federal government that weren't functional. So it's also California is a very bizarre place. There's definitely a lot of talent here, but also just walking around in California, like people are generally self-absorbed. One can argue, the Californians are very self-absorbed, and the American culture is not egalitarian. It was never a collective society. It has a history of experiencing a lot of setbacks and being able to bounce back. I think that's when you talk about the American story, that's a very strong message. It can take a hit and come back. But I'm not sure. It would be great to see VC funding. I know the VC funding has dried up. That's all I read a lot about that. But it'll be interesting to see.
Well, I guess there's no money in people's misery.
Yeah, I think it's interesting so I think, walking around and now, especially having a kid in California, sort of adding on, it's a very progressive, relatively progressive state. But the progressives don't get along with each other. There's all these schisms in the progressive, the Democratic Party. They don't talk to each other. And I started to get involved, and I'm like, well, okay, you guys don't like each other. Why am I wasting my time hanging out with you guys? And there's no sense of, I mean, you would think in a situation like this, I think what's happening is smaller communities are trying to help each other out. Like, you live in certain neighborhoods, your friends are coming out to help you. Like in our case, our friends are coming out to help us. Hey, you guys are pregnant in COVID-19. This is stressful. So you have these individual, small community friends, people trying to help each other out. But I think on the bigger level, beyond that, I don't know. I have not seen massive involvement of big corporations, the talent that the state has in trying to resolve this situation. Like big funds, big VC funds, or big tech or big corporations. I haven't seen that. And I agree with you. I read stories about, ingenuity of people from all over the world, like trying to make things from out of nothing to help. But I haven't seen that. And I think that goes on to, I think it's a winner take all economy. The emphasis is less on egalitarianism or collectivism. And I think this is also showing the cracks of that. This is sort of embellishing that. We always knew it was a winner take all economy. But now it's like, wow, okay, I knew it. Now I'm like, I'm seeing it. This is, it's not comforting.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that people are seeing that, first of all, how many, sharing platforms do we need, like Uber and Airbnb?
Oh yeah.
How many e-commerce sites do we need, in times like this, that these companies that have made multi-billion dollars out of not just off of investors, mom and pop investors, but also
Right.
out of consumerism and unfettered capitalism, are no position, or either not willing or no position, to help out and give back, even in the sense of being able to apply their genius and all the resources at their disposal to solve some of the issues that the government and the people are dealing with, right? That to me like shows fundamentally how not only that it isn't real, all of the technology and innovation that comes out of Silicon Valley isn't real, but also that it's actually of very little value when it comes down to something like a pandemic.
Yeah, I think I've talked to someone, there's some new fintech companies that have started, COVID-19 fintech companies, trying to help small businesses. I hope that's a positive thing.
Yeah, not
But
just
no,
predators swimming around trying to look for an opportunity to make money, right?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that's like a legitimate way to help small businesses because they're really, really hurting.
It's
And you
like
know,
banks and their so-called, help and support for people by allowing you to defer your payments, right? Yeah, it doesn't help the bank at all in the fact that they get to charge you more interest and extend the length of your loan. Like deferral of anything is not real. So I hope
yeah,
that these fintech companies aren't just seeing an opportunity to make a
I hope
profit
so too.
off of
And I
misery.
hope, and I really hope that I'm wrong when I say that I haven't heard anything. I hope there's tons of stuff out there that people are working on. It's just that I haven't heard about it, and I hope I'm wrong. But to be honest, I think if something were like if something like that were happening in California right now, I think I'd like to think that I would know or my wife would know and she would tell me, but we have not seen anything from the
Of
fifth
course you
largest
would know. Of
economy.
course you would know. I mean, I know
Yeah,
immediately when something in my city happens
yeah,
that's innovative and designed to help people. And, if somebody's made a breakthrough on a vaccine, somebody's figured out how to make a ventilator, somebody's figured out how to
yeah,
retool their plant to make PPE. We hear about that immediately. It's immediate news. So I'd be
yeah.
surprised you sitting next door to Silicon Valley have somehow missed out on these great breakthroughs that are happening.
Yeah, I mean, all I know the last I heard was the state has gone above and beyond to procure suppliers from outside of the US and the US and then retool some factories to give us about 100,000 masks or for daily usage and all these ventilators. But that was like a couple weeks ago, and we were hoping that all of that would materialize in May, but that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
also too, I mean,
it was yeah,
the reality is that, very little manufacturing probably happens in Silicon Valley. You know what I mean? Because it's all
yeah,
offshore, right?
and I think
Because
that's the biggest
we have a
thing.
system that's
Yeah,
designed on profiteering and margins, right? So, nothing is made, despite of all of its innovation, nothing is
yeah.
actually made in Silicon Valley.
And the suppliers in China are saying, hey, we would have exported all this to you, but we need them now. We
Yeah.
need all these massive ventilators. We have 1.3 billion people in this country. So I think there's another bigger conversation about, you know, reconfiguring your supply chain, bringing things back in your backyard versus shipping everything overseas. So there's a bigger conversation around that. But
And a
I'm
conversation around like essentials, right? It's like
right.
in our governments, and this is both Canada and the U.S., right? There has to be an understanding of there's some things that government has to be responsible for, right?
Yeah, and I
Government
think
has to be responsible for the security and welfare of its citizens when it comes to education, when it comes to healthcare,
yeah,
when it comes to childcare, when it comes to elderly care. All of these things have been magnified during this pandemic of how little we are prepared to take care of the most vulnerable in our societies, and it's all designed and actually to only
right.
protect capitalism.
Yeah, and I think that's the one of the big differentiators between the U.S. and Canada. Um, and people ask me all the time, what's the difference between the United States and Canada? And I always have my own perspective. Um, and I always tell people one or two stories that just to kind of give them a very vivid um, clarification of what America and versus Canada is. Um, I agree with you. That's the role of government. What is that? What do you need a government for? That there are lots of conversation around that in California and in other parts of the U.S. as well. Um, but that's an ongoing conversation all the time. That's a very hot political conversation that starts from the top, goes all the way to the counties and the cities and the states and other parts of the country. The role of government, what exactly does it do? Uh, and the reality of the situation is, I think, um, a lot of times, this is when the state has to step in. These are the exact times when the government steps in to look after its residents and its citizens and its people. And when this doesn't happen, then you don't really. There's nothing you can do. Your hope is your friends and your community hopefully they'll come through. And then if that doesn't happen, then it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough out. So yeah, it's just the stark reality of the times we live in.
So you have some political ambitions. Tell me a little bit about that. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I thought about, at some point I'll come back to Canada. I'll participate in some sort of a political process. It could be either running for office, or working for a politician that I believe in, someone that I think is doing a good job for the country. So I think it's a long-term plan. Politics is also a very unpredictable business. I'll give you a little bit of snap. I've worked with politicians and political parties in Canada. I was part of Michael Ignatieff's Liberal Party campaign when Michael Ignatieff was running against Bob Rae. This is 2010, I believe, or something like that, for the Liberal leadership. He ended up winning. Bob Rae dropped out. My greatest contribution to Michael Ignatieff's campaign was I got him a donation of $20. Not that it matters, but anyways, he lost. And when I went to Nova Scotia, I was actually recruited by the Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia. It's a party that was changing. They wanted young people. They wanted new ideas, fresh ideas. And there was a time that I was working for a city councillor. She was NDP. And then I was doing policy work for the PC party in Nova Scotia. And then I was also, one of my good friends was a Liberal. His dad ran for Peter MacKay, who was the defense minister at some point, Canadian defense minister. His dad ran against him from the Liberal side. And then, so I was sort of involved. I got to see a little bit of everything, I think. Gave me a good idea of how things are, a basic idea. I mean, politics is, again, it can be very complex. But so that being said, I did think about running at some point, and I still think about it. I also know that politics is shaky and unpredictable because you could be out of office. It's easier to run for political office if we talked about that, during our earlier conversation, if you have a bit of a nest egg. It's hard to run for office when you don't have a nest egg. And even if you do, even if you have a good political career, and you could be out of office and out of a job for a while, and that's harder if you have a family. So there's definitely that concern. So I think if I were to do it, I'd have to figure out a way to set myself up. How to get nominations? How do I become a viable candidate for a party? I am not affiliated with any Canadian political party at this point. And so, yeah, it's a long-term thing. I'd have to come back to Canada, and I will. I think my wife and I talk about it all the time. It's a matter of when. And I think when I think I'm at a level where I can actually make a difference and contribute and, be part of something positive, yes, I would like to participate in that process.
Well, I mean, who knows? We might have a chance to work together when you come back to Canada.
Yeah.
So tell me, I mean, you have a baby on the way, your first, and you're a young couple living in California. And what would you guys, and what would you as a new father like to see the changes that coming after the pandemic, and what kind of changes would you like to see? I mean, in an ideal world, some of the conversations that we're seeing happen in terms of more rights for workers and more like you said, an egalitarian society. What kind of things do you think are likely to happen, and what kind of things would you wish to happen?
I think there's definitely been a sense of who are the important people. That's been made more prominent in this crisis. You're the guy who makes your bagel. You go to a restaurant, people who are serving you food, people who are cooking in the kitchen, people are supplying you the things that you need to live on. Obviously, your doctors and nurses, but it's a lot of the frontline workers. You go to Walmart, you go to these stores, and the things that you need to live on every day, people who make that happen, those people are very important. I think before this, you didn't think about it. But in this crisis, you have learned to appreciate that and some kind of protection for those people. If it's, higher wage so that they can live a little bit more comfortably, some sort of a health protection. I think this is a funny, interesting thing that people who are considered or categorized as low income, they have a tougher life in the US versus Canada. And I think some sort of legal provision where they can actually have, affordable healthcare. They can do things that they're not able to do. Some job security, some healthcare. I think that's one change that I'd like to see post-COVID.
It's not just that, Ali. I mean, people don't realize, and we're having these conversations in Canada as well, right? Oh, why can't I golf? The ability to social distance in golf is,
Yeah.
better than any other place. And why can't I go to a restaurant, and we just space out the tables? Well, here's why you can't, is because in order for you to have your burger, in order for you to swing your golf club, people have to maintain and run those operations. Those
Absolutely.
people, as soon as these golf clubs and restaurants open up, they have no ability now to collect unemployment insurance because their employer says, well, you can come to work, right? Second of all, a large part of these essential workers may need to take public transportation, which increases their risks for them and their families.
Yeah.
They have to work in crowded kitchens. They have to work under crowded conditions to take care of you and make sure you have the ability to go golfing and to have a burger. And these are the things that we don't consider. It's just like, well, I don't understand. Why can't I golf? Why can't I get a haircut? Why can't I get a burger?
And I think I agree with you. That I think that's something that's this situation has made us think. This is something we've been forced to think about these people, like we just took them, we took them for granted.
Yeah.
And we've been forced to think about their lives. We've been forced to think about how they function and operate on a day-to-day to make our lives easier. And I think what I would definitely hope that people have realized that these people are very important. They're just as important as any other person, and they deserve better. They deserve more recognition from everybody else, people like myself, and they deserve whatever that they deserve the things that they need to have their life function in the best way possible. Whether it's some provision that gives them better benefits or something else. So yeah, I really hope that materializes into something. That sort of recognition and understanding of plight of people, just in general, that materializes into something positive.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone earlier today in Norway. Norway takes an interesting approach to labor rights and worker rights. It's not left in the hands of capitalists and owners of corporations to decide, how they pay their employees. It's a collective tool, right? They have a federation of employers and unions that work together and public departments that work together to decide on these things, and then they decide it equally. So, instead of me saying, oh, well, I can't afford to pay my servers, $15 an hour because my competitor won't, and then he'll make more money and put me out of business. No, me and my competitors all decided what that minimum wage is going to be that we can afford and still, maintain profitability, right? And so therefore, we're all on the same page in terms of our expenses, right? That's the way to approach these kinds of things, is not leave it in the hands of individual corporations who are always going to do what's best for shareholders and for profit, but to put it in the hands of a more equal voice sort of approach where everybody is collectively discussing these things and making a decision that is fair to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, the Scandinavian countries and, certain European countries, they've perfected that model of collaboration and negotiation between different stakeholders and parties to come up with something that benefits all of them. Again, that's very idealistic, I think, for a country like the US. The political ideology is very different. But I'm really, really hoping that all this will change things in a positive way. This will take the conversation further. This will this will make people come to the table a lot more so than in the past. So, I definitely hope that that's definitely an aspiration.
Let's talk about the upcoming U.S. election. So, Bernie's out now. You guys have a choice between
Yeah.
Biden and Trump.
Yeah, it's
What's the thoughts on that? And
uh
second of all, so
yeah,
California has been the first state to actually pass now
yeah,
mail-in ballots for everyone. So universal mail-in ballots. I mean, you had more than half your voters already had access to an
mm,
optional mail-in ballot, because some of your counties had in California had already decided to give them that option. But now your governor has declared that for the fall election, that everybody will have the ability to mail in. And I mean, you'll still have in-person voting, but obviously, in-person voting comes with the challenges of space and, workers and PPE and all of
yeah.
these kinds of things
So
that have to be addressed for a country that has the population, or sorry, a state that has a population of California, which, that's a huge challenge. But I just don't understand. I mean, I don't understand why, this is even a discussion during a pandemic of, I mean, forget mail-in voting. I mean, I actually agree, with some opinions that mail-in voting is subject to security issues and fraud, right? But I don't understand why you can't do online voting. Like, it baffles me that you're talking about mail-in voting when, again, you live in the technology hub of the world, where millions and billions of dollars are transferred, I bet you, out of California around the world with no worries about concerns. And now,
yeah,
actually, the other thing I bring up all the time is, like, all these people are going on to government websites and entering their information in order
yeah,
to get their financial assistance. Nobody worries about the security of that, right? It's like, you're entering all your businesses details and information on these government websites to get some of the financial supports. But oh no, we can't securely do mail-in or online voting. Like, that's a concern. When there's no concern about your private information or your money when it comes to online, but voting online is not, it just can't be done.
what's interesting about this election is it's at this time in any election cycle, um, there's just a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of coverage. No one is thinking about the election right now, to be honest. It's not in anyone's mind. It's not in anyone's agenda. People are just focused on their day to day, how to function in this situation, and then the best that they can do is, okay, what's going to happen in July? What's our life going to look like in July? Election is on no one's mind. Um, Biden is again the Democratic nominee, and he's not getting any attention, and he's not getting any airtime. I just realized that he started his own podcast, he's been pretty active. Um, and so it's interesting. I don't even know what's going to happen. No one really knows what's going to happen. Everybody thinks there are all these polls giving all kinds of numbers. Some favor Trump, and then they don't. They favor Biden. Sometimes they say they're both neck to neck, but no one really knows. There's just not a lot of people aren't really thinking about election. It's in November, which is not far.
Not far. And I mean, now the DNC, the
Yeah,
Democratic National Committee, has put off the. I mean, I think it's important to note that Biden is not yet acclaimed as the nominee because the convention has been put off
that's
now.
true.
Originally, it
That's
was
true.
supposed to be in May, then it was put off till June, then now I think it's July that they're hoping to have the convention. So even if they can't do it in July, they're going to have to figure, well, I guess they'll just acclaim him at some point without a convention. But there's been this controversy in New York in the ballot where Bernie wasn't put on the ballot, so Bernie's fighting that. So it's not over yet in terms of Biden being the assumed
Yeah, it's
nominee.
not.
But also, to your point, Biden's going to have a tough time for share of voice
Yeah.
in media and in the public consciousness against someone like Trump.
Yeah, I mean, he's not in anyone's consciousness. He was until this happened, and then it's just, I think he's not talked about. I think, yeah, even on other social media channels, yeah, there's some conversation, but he's, people are just too focused on other things, and which is kind of really strange because this is the time when everybody's just really into the whole election cycle and really paying attention to what's happening in politics. I think the only politics that people are paying attention is what's coming out of the White House. And that is 100% monopolized by the president. And if there's any airtime, he's the one getting it. Biden is not getting any airtime. And the mail-in ballot system, and I agree with you, this is the funny thing about this innovation capital. If you live here, this is something that I've noticed, like all Canadians, all Torontonians, when they come to the Bay, there's so many billionaires in the Bay, right? I mean, their transportation system is like, wow, the TDC is just awesome compared to the BART. It's called the BART. I don't know what it stands for, but that's the BART. Or then
Bay Area Rapid Transit.
Yeah, and then it's the Muni, that's within the city of California, within the city of San Francisco. And if you just walk around, if you've lived here, once the honeymoon period is over, every city you go to, there's that everything is beautiful, everything is great, every person you meet. Once those couple months are over, when you start, your day to day, once you really get into the grind, like, it's a good city, but they're bullet trains. For the French started bullet trains 20 years ago, like computerized. There's no one driving them. It's all automated. They're not known to be the hotbeds of innovation. Those cities are not. California, when you talk about Silicon Valley, that's what you think about. But there's a lot of, why can't you go vote online? Why do you have to mail it in? Yeah, it's a very logical question, especially in California. But a lot of things are very old school. Innovation has not translated into, government, or the technology that we think about has not trickled down into the day-to-day stuff that people do. We don't have fancy bullet trains. We don't have the fancy infrastructure that you would think you would have in California. We just don't. The infrastructure is old, and not just the physical infrastructure, also the government infrastructure, web infrastructure, technology.
Well, so it's pretty pitiful that
it's very old school.
Given the GDP of California, given Silicon Valley, that you only have $40 billion in reserves when Norway has $1 trillion in reserves. Second of all, it's actually, shows the facade of Silicon Valley, because you're absolutely right. You would think it was this shining city on the hill, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been there. The public transportation system is nothing to speak of, even compared to a place like Toronto, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the problem though, Ali, is that the money doesn't stay in California, does it? Right, from these multi-billion-dollar unicorn tech companies, right?
They don't pay taxes.
They don't pay taxes, and the money is hoarded offshore, right?
Yeah.
Don't Apple and Google and Amazon all have billions and billions of dollars in reserves, but it isn't in the U.S. Not anywhere anybody can touch it.
Right, and it's not just the big corporations or unicorns, right? I mean, people talk about, the state collects a lot in taxes. If you just look at the balance sheet, it's a rich state. But if you talk to people who've been living here for a long time, people who've been living here at least a couple of years, 5, 10, 20 years, they'll tell you, nothing works here. You're new. You guys are new. I mean, I had this old gentleman that he's a good friend of mine. He asked me, are you and your wife, are you hoping to have children? I'm like, yeah, we'd like to have children. Like, yeah, well, just a heads up, the schools are pretty bad. I'm like, how are the schools so bad? You pay a lot in taxes. If you think about the taxes, the federal taxes, the state taxes, and then the healthcare insurance you pay, it's not any different from what you would pay in Ontario. I mean, sure, there are differences, but it's not night and day. I think that gross is a little bit more, but if you just take all the taxes out, it's like you're living in Ontario or in Toronto. But I think the difference is what you get for your tax dollars. That's the difference here in the Bay versus any Canadian city. I mean, I've only lived in Toronto, and that's more of a comparison because one big city versus the other big city, right?
And Halifax, right? You live in Halifax.
But Halifax is a small city. It's like 300,000 people, so it's hard to compare Halifax to.
No, but I mean, you can make that comparison. our public school system in Canada is far above and beyond the US's. Never mind,
So-
I would compare our public school system in Canada to the best of the private schools in
No,
the
I agree.
US.
I
And if
think
you
that's
can't
the
afford,
difference.
if you can't afford the best of the private schools in the US, yeah, your children are not going to get a good education.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality. So I think if you just look at the two countries, I think for what you have, and my friends from Toronto, like, I know some women that work in the Valley, they're in tech, and other areas, and they're like, yeah, well, Toronto is safer for a young woman walking around at night. I mean, Toronto's cleaner. Our system, our transportation system is better. So there are a lot of things that, what you put your money to. Like, when you're in Toronto, you complain about a lot of things, right? Like, oh my God, this and that. But that's just human reaction. It's just how people are. But I think when you have a different city that you can use Toronto as a benchmark and compare that to, then you're like, whoa, wow, things were actually pretty good. So this hotbed of innovation, you don't see it. You don't, when you come to California, you don't, it's very beautiful. It's very pretty. If you leave the cities, you drive around outside, good beaches and all, nice towns and all that stuff. But that hotbed of innovation is not in the public services. It's just not there. And that goes again with your initial point. It's not, mail-in ballot. We are in the Silicon Valley, you could just scan yourself and then just go online and vote,
Exactly. Optical scan, face recognition.
Yeah,
What
you
is it?
have that in
How is
offices.
a mail-in ballot more secure than online where you could have it so that you go on a government website to vote, you have to like scan do an optical scan, do face recognition, do a
Yeah,
thumbprint, whatever it takes, and before
yeah,
you vote versus a mail-in ballot, anybody could fill out that form and send it in.
yeah. I mean, that's what it is. I think that's a very good point. I mean, none of this happens in California. You think this would be the leader in all of these things, but it's not. And that's the surprising fact. And with, you know, relatively speaking, not the best public transportation system, not the best school system. Uh, but hey, here we are. People are living here, paying taxes. Generally, people have a good life, but yeah, but you don't
Well,
get anything.
people are there for the climate too. Let's face it. There's a reason why there's like
Yeah,
40 million
yeah,
people in California. Like that's one of the
yeah.
best climates in the world
It
to
is.
live in.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, depending on what part of California you live in. I mean, I'm always very anti in San Francisco. I always feel very cold. I don't know. It's just how it is. But Southern California is very warm and nice. But yeah, I mean, back to your point, this is the Silicon Valley, but walking around, just living here, you don't see that the awesome technology that you think about or you visualize. Yeah, that's what it is.
All right, Ali, it's great talking to you. Thank you for all of your insights and comments. Anything you want to leave off with? Any observations that you've left off, or any hopes or expectations you have post-pandemic?
No, I just honestly just hoping for a healthy delivery and healthy baby and healthy mom, and just that's it. That's all I think about now, being a dad.
Well,
And being a
congratulations again to you
yeah.
and your wife, and let me know. Do you guys know what you're having? I think you
Yeah,
told me
we're
you had a
having a
girl,
girl.
right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, man. Hashtag girl dad. Join the club.
No, no,
Hey,
I'm
man,
very
it's the
excited.
best thing
Yeah,
ever, man.
yeah,
The
yeah,
best
yeah.
thing ever.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. I think that's all I think about. The last couple weeks, couple of days, just think about being a dad,
Awesome.
and getting, that's it. Hopefully everything goes well. And it's a very different though. That's also very, the thing that you took for granted, that that you'd have support, your family would be able to come in, and
Mm.
then now you have to go to the hospital. One person is outside, the other person inside. Everybody's walking around with masks. It's a very different. Having a baby now is just in the middle of a pandemic, is it has its own stress level. Um, so
Oh, I can
or
imagine.
own
Well, here
own anxiety.
I'll give you some tips as a father of one, and I've only been a father for a couple of years, so take it with a grain of salt. But first of all, your biggest job in the first few months when the baby comes home is to make sure that your wife doesn't have additional stresses, which is, you know, taking care of
Yep.
more than before, taking care of the house and, you know, making
Yep.
sure she does, and also just making sure she always has a glass of water within reach, you know, especially as she goes through feeding the baby and all those kinds of things. That's
No,
something my
that's a good
friend,
point. That's a good
that's
one.
one the advice my friend told me. He's like, you know, he's like, you're useless except to make sure that there's a glass of water within within arm's reach, and
No,
making
that's
sure
actually a
that
good one. Yeah.
your wife isn't additionally stressed about
No,
laundry
no.
and dishes and groceries, and if you can take away those stresses from her, that's the best you can do. Second thing is to remember, and, you know, not to be too hard on yourself as a father, is, you know, they say like a woman becomes a mother the day she finds out she's pregnant, but we don't
Hmm.
become fathers until, you know, the baby's in our hands, and we've had some
Yeah,
time, right?
I agree with that.
Because
I think.
we're a little bit disadvantaged in that we don't get that 9 months of
Yeah.
connection, right? So be a little gentle on yourself if you don't feel like you know what you're doing, or you don't feel, you know, that connected or knowledgeable. It takes time. It takes time.
No, I know. I know it takes time. I'm looking forward to the real life experience and practice. And yeah, looking forward to it. Hopefully, you know, all goes well, and that's all as a family, my wife and I. I mean, that's all we're hoping. A healthy baby and healthy mom, and the next couple months, and just kind of surviving this, and you know, just being parents and being a couple. That's pretty much it.
All
That's
right,
our
man.
post-COVID.
All right. Good luck with everything, and my congratulations again. And great
Thank you.
chatting with you. And let's stay in touch. Maybe we'll circle back in a month or two and see how things are going.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's keep in touch, and then as the political climate heats up in California, I don't know how plugged in I will be, but I think in around August, September, I could see things heating up. And even though with the whole COVID thing, if this continues, I think there'll be a lot of conversation, it's going to generate a lot of heat. So I think let's maybe circle back around that time.
Oh, it's going to be interesting times for sure. I mean, as things start opening up again in this conversation, I mean, I don't know what the laws are in the U.S. in terms of being able to delay an election, but you know, if they're going to go through with it in early November, then yeah, we're running out of time. Okay, my friend,
Yeah. All right.
enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and
Thank you. You too.
we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too.